Devils Brocast. I apologize for missing last week. It was a bit of a crazy Tuesday for me, but I am back. J-Bake here on Radio Garden State, Jersey Devils Brocast. As always, we are live on Tuesday nights, 9 to 10 o'clock on Radio Garden State, which is now using the Live 365 app and server and technology as we give you some of the coolest music, and I give you some sports talk here in the area. Download the Live 365 app, favorite Radio Garden State, and just the rest takes care of itself. But here in Devils land, you know, we are in off-season mode here in New Jersey, which isn't good. That's not what we wanted. We kind of wanted to be on a playoff run. We wanted to be either Carolina or Montreal or the Colorado Avalanche or Vegas and be in the Final Four and competing for the Stanley Cup Finals. But the offseason began in New Jersey a while ago now. Man, it feels like it was months ago they played a game. And we're going at about a month now of no Devils hockey. It's kind of sad. But we still have some news as the Devils begin their transformation into the Sonny Meta years for this franchise. So today it was announced that Rogalski is gone. So many of you fans that hated the goalie coach, that have blamed him for all goalie issues in the last, I think he's been on 6-7 years now, he's gone. We'll be bringing in somebody else. Sergei Brylin will be reassigned to another role within the organization. And the New Jersey Devils will be keeping Sheldon Keefe, which I kind of predicted 2 weeks ago. Sonny Meta Day, when he was doing his press conference, the fact that Sheldon Keefe was there, I thought was a pretty good sign for Sheldon that he was going to be keeping his job and will be working as the head coach of the Devils moving forward. I don't think he would have made the effort to attend or be there if that wasn't really the case, or maybe there weren't already some sort of assurances that his job was going to be safe. But yeah, Sheldon Keefe is sticking around. So how do I feel about that? I mean, this has some mixed reactions among many of the fans I've seen online, because I think there's the feeling that was it really Sheldon Keefe's fault with the injuries and the other issues that the organization has had? You know, was it his fault for the Chicago steakhouse incident that kind of took the air out of the balloon there and for the season? I don't think so. Was it his issue how poorly they played when Jack Hughes was out of the lineup? Well, yeah, that might be on him. You know, how they kind of had a lull in the middle of the season the year before in the 2025 season, if you remember, kind of around Four Nations. Reese and I were saying, hey, hopefully this gets some guys going because we haven't played well for a while, and that was before all the injuries hit. This team was relatively healthy in the back half of December, January, going into February, and they didn't really play that well. If it were me, I would have made a change. And I don't think it's necessarily that Keefe is a bad coach, that Keefe made bad decisions. You know, we have those examples across pro sports of the manager or the head coach and just making some decisions that you're like, all right, this is a guy that is desperate and is trying to do something to switch this up and get things going. I can't really think of many decisions Keefe made that I thought were horrible that really come to mind. But I think sometimes it's more than that. If you need to make a big sweeping change to the culture of this team, which I think they might need to do, you know, this has been a loser for a while. I'm not calling them a bunch of losers, but the team has been losing for a while. He's been the coach for 2 years. They've won one playoff game, and that's it. You know, this team lost a lot under Lindy Ruff and had basically one good year. That maybe there's more to this than just the coach, that maybe you do need to bring in a guy that, you know, a personality that maybe fits this team and what they need to take them to the next level. I'm just not so sure that Keefe right now is that guy. And I understand he's a good coach and it's not all his fault. However, I think this all goes beyond the systems and the X's and the O's and having this guy here, have this guy be your bumper guy, have this guy do this, more Timo Meier time on the power play, etc. I think a lot of things, it's a mindset of a team. And I think this team needs a restart and a reboot. I think it's hard to start fresh and restart or reboot when you have the same head coach. And they're making changes to the assistant coaches, fine. They've made a lot of front office changes, sweeping ones from top to bottom. That's great. But the head coach is almost as important as your general manager or president of hockey ops. He's got, I mean, they're right up there. He's running essentially the day-to-day of the team and what these guys are doing. And I think anyone with a job, right? When you have a boss, that maybe they're a good boss, and maybe that you respect them, but the company's not doing as well as it should. And maybe the boss just isn't, or coach isn't getting as much out of the employees or the other people in the company as they should. And sometimes I think it's just you need a fresh start and have everyone start over again. And just kind of start from the beginning. Bring this thing right down to the bottom and start over. And I don't think they need to do that with the roster, but I think they should have done that with the coach. And I don't have, this isn't a quantitative study, but on a qualitative level, I do feel that when a general manager or a new front office just retains the head coach, it just doesn't seem to work out that well. At least in the tri-state area here with New York-based teams, I can't think of many times where that has worked out. When Ray Shero came in, he brought in John Hines. Now, different set of circumstances. Devils didn't really have a coach, but they needed a change. Lamoriello made a ton of coaching changes, but I feel like this would have been a typical offseason where Lamoriello would have made a coaching change. He's had 2 years. They didn't get past the first round. They didn't make the playoffs last year. There were times where this team was healthy and they just were playing like crap. I just don't think that would hold up. Lamoriello fired head coaches for accomplishing a lot more. Head coaches that were first in the league when they got fired. Head coaches that had best records in hockey for periods of time. Head coaches that won Stanley Cups with this team. I think if this were the Lamoriello years, a change would have been made. And we all know that Lamoriello loved bringing in tough coaches. Rarely did he not. Larry Robinson was really one of the only guys that wasn't a taskmaster that Lamoriello brought in. And also, sorry, folks, if I mispronounce some words tonight, I've been up for a very long time. I'm very tired. So feel free to laugh. It's fine. I'll be laughing with you later. But yeah, Lamoriello, I think, probably would have made that change. And it's about a compete level and attention to detail. You show up every day. You're prepared. You're not taking nights off. Yeah, you have the doldrums of the season, the dog days of February, where it's hard to get up for a game that's kind of meaningless out west. I get it. We're all people. I'm sure we'd all feel the same way. But when this team was fighting for their life to just stay relevant, they more or less collapsed. And you can blame the leadership group on the team, whether that's Nico and Bratt or Meyer or Dougie and all of the guys. But I think a lot of blame should go on the coach for some of that too, and the team kind of just really collapses and doesn't rise to the moment or rise to the occasion and take control of the season and get back on track. Because especially in January and February, this team was not an injury-riddled disaster. They had the same amount of injuries as everybody else. Who's banged up a little bit? This defenseman is out. They had a lineup that should have been winning more than it was. And certainly should have been competing much harder than they were. And that's where I kind of go, I don't know if it's Keefe's fault for that. I'm not privy to locker room conversations and the tactics and what he was trying to do. But I just think when you go through something like that and the team just doesn't rise to the occasion, maybe the team needs a mindset change. Maybe they need to come into this year with a new head coach, a new type of energy, and a new way of doing things. And Sheldon Keefe will get a job very quickly. But I'm not sure this was the right decision. Now, also, you can't just fire a guy and then figure out what you're going to do. I think you have to at least come to the conclusion that there are several candidates out there that fit what you're looking for. And frankly, maybe that's also why. Bruce Cassidy is more of a defensive-first coach. He fits kind of the Lamoriello years. He probably would have been perfect back then for Lou. But I would imagine Sonny Maeda is going more for offense and skill and speed and really try to fit into the strengths of this roster right now in the core group of Bratt and Nico and Jack and not make this a defensive first team, which it seemed like they tried midseason and that didn't really work out too well, to make some corrections and some changes when Jack was out and it really didn't work. And maybe he just didn't feel there was a coach out there that really fit what they were looking for and that type of way they want this team to play. And fair enough, that's the case. But I just think much like the Mets right now, as many of you know, I'm a very emotional Mets fan. You know, leaving Mendoza as the manager, well, I mean, now when the team falters to coming out of the gate, like, well, now he's on the hot seat immediately. And that could be a distraction. It just feels like, well, you should have just dumped the guy in the offseason. Now you're going to do it midseason. It almost feels like now it's too late. You should have done it last year. It should have been done in December or November. And with Keefe, it feels like if they have a slow start, which they haven't with him, frankly, they've had good starts to the season both years. Just when, are we now just going to be talking about the head coach and his job and immediately? There is no leash. There's no 20 games into the season. It's just if they go 1-4 out of the gate, it's just going to be they should have fired Keefe and brought in a new coach almost right away. It's a distraction. I just feel like if you're going to make the change, just do it now. Especially you have a new GM, bringing in a lot of new people in the front office, making changes to the coaching staff. I just don't know why stop there. But we will see. As always, I'm rooting for the Devils. I'm hoping this is the right decision. And, I love the hire of Sonny Maeda, so I got to have some faith in this guy, right? I can't say he's the guy for the job and I want him to be the GM, I want him to run the team, I want him to be our guy. And then when he starts making decisions, I don't like that. Well, we got to have some faith in this guy. Let's let him do his thing. And hopefully this is the right decision, but I'll be on the record. I kind of would have made the switch. But moving on from all the coaching stuff. And now that's over. We can put it behind us. There's no coaching search here. We're now moving into players and the roster and how do we build this team. And the New Jersey Devils are going to be entering the draft with the 12th overall pick. I don't know if you heard that. Draft lottery. All that stuff just happened. And the New Jersey Devils are going to be picking 12th, which I love seeing these conversations online about the Devils and drafting and developing and where have things gone wrong. And a great post I saw from I guess She Chips, SHI Chips, is that what you'd say it on Instagram? It's a really cool account, covers a lot of Devils stuff. I said I was going to do a shout out to him on the show today, but he mentioned the worst draft class in Devils history, 2014. Devils drafted John Quenneville in the first round, Josh Jacobs, Connor Chatham, Ryan Rehill, J.D. Dudek, and Brandon Baddock. They all played a combined 46 games and had 5 points. They had more penalty minutes than points. 8 penalty minutes, 5 points. Drafting is very important. It's not a throwaway. I know we don't recognize the names of all of these players. Some of these guys, the weight of their name, it's just not there yet. But it is important, and it's a pivot that the Devils need to make from whatever they've been trying to do. Because the Devils farm system right now is not in great shape. With the amount of losing this team has done in the last 7 years, they should have better prospects and be in a much better position than they are. And they're not. And frankly, I can't think of many prospects or players they've traded, like into the Timo Meier deal. Like, all right, Zetterlund was a nice player, and Muka Medulin looks like he could be a nice defensiveman and has a future in the league. But it's not like they gave up all these great prospects. When they traded for Markstrom, was that Kevin Ball? Nice bottom four defenseman. Okay. Tyler Toffoli. I believe those were draft picks. I could be wrong. No, that was Sharon Govich. Sorry. Who's a nice player, right? Nice player. But it's not like the Devils have been drafting and developing these great players and they just traded them away to win now. There really hasn't been much. Simone Nemec, Luke Hughes, Gritsuk, Haminaho, Yegorov, Silyayev. Like, those are all the young guys. And some of them are not prospects anymore. Nemec and Hughes are not. They've played too many NHL games. They're now young, developing defensemen. And by the way, we're going to be doing a Luke Hughes grade later. But they're not prospects. They're graduated. There aren't many impactful prospects in this system, and that's a problem. And referencing that post about the 2014 draft, that has a long-term effect on your organization when you make those selections and you can't get one guy to work out. The 2015 draft, Zacha was 6th overall. They took Blackwood in the 2nd round. Blackwood's doing great in Colorado. Zacha turned his career around in Boston. I'm not so sure either would have accomplished that here in Jersey. They really needed a change. But what was regarded as one of the best drafts of the decade, the Devils didn't exactly do well. Now, 2016, you got McLeod. Well, he's gone. We don't need to talk about that. Bratt was a huge find. 17 with the Nico Hischier pick was great. You know, there's some good guys along the way. You know, Mercer's a nice player. Jack Hughes is a stud, superstar, maybe a Hall of Famer. They've done well in that top 5 with Luke and with Nemec. They have some intriguing guys, but they haven't been able to really fill out the roster with good players from their farm system. I think that's a big reason why they've had issues scoring. They've had issues with depth. They've had issues sustaining winning while injured because they just don't have those guys. And kind of the glory days of the Devils, it just always seemed like they could bring in some guys to fill some roles to just keep things together. The 2000 team, we talk about the A-line. You talk about the trade from Mogilny. You talk about Stevens and Niedermeyer and Marty. But, like, that team also, Gomez came in. Madden came in. They brought Rafalski over from Europe. Colin White started playing big minutes. You know, that matters when you have those guys coming out of your system. Johnny Madden became, one of the best defensive centermen in the game. Like, who is that in the Devils system right now? I don't know if they have that. Silyayev is a nice prospect over in Russia, but still seems to be a work in progress. I think he just came over. He might have signed a pro deal here. Let me just, sorry if I am a little behind on that one here. But he's poised to come over and sign with the Devils if he hasn't already. So it looks like he's going to be making the journey over to North America. But he's a work in progress. He's hardly a sure thing right now. And he was, a 6th overall pick? Looks like he projects to be a big defenseman that maybe could give a little bit offensively, but so far I'm not sold on that. You know, you can't build a championship team and not have anyone work out. And the other thing is, if you have quality players and quality picks, then you can make good trades. You know, Florida has done a lot of that. Vegas, it seems like they rarely hold on to anybody. But when you're drafting really good players, even in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round, and you have guys that other teams want, well, now guess what? You can make trades. You know, the Quinn Hughes trade, a lot of that is just Minnesota had the pieces that we just don't. You know, Vancouver wanted what Minnesota was able to offer, and, you know, the Devils just weren't able to maybe match that, beyond the cap issues and all the other things that we've talked about ad nauseum. But, like, that's a big part of it. If you don't have the prospects and the young players to do that, how can you now expect to go and make those big trades? You know, we're going to talk about a name that's been popping up recently. How can you make a trade for this guy if you don't have the pieces that team wants? If they're looking for a solid top 6 forward kind of prospect, plus a top 4 defenseman kind of prospect, and some picks, if you don't have those guys, or if you have other teams that have, we have several guys that look like top line guys, and we're willing to get rid of 1 or 2 of them to get your player to win now, like, the Devils just can't keep up with that. And I think drafting and developing just gives you so many tools. You can use those players. They can grow into your organization and become important players for you, or they can be used. Be used to go and, you know, Get the guys you need right now. And the Devils haven't done a good job in that in a while. And that was something that was supposed to change when Ray Shero came in. David Conte and Lamoriello, it's like the magic just went out. You can argue the reason the Devils, their dynasty ended when it did was because their farm system their pipeline dried out. They didn't have anybody. Their best prospect for a while was Stephane Matteau, who ended up being a fringe NHL player. Reed Boucher, who ended up being a creep and having all kinds of off-the-ice issues, and then was not a very good NHL player, period. So, they didn't have those guys coming in when they had John Merrill and Eric Jelinas, and John Merrill's been a serviceable NHL defenseman. Adam Larson turned into a really nice top four, shutdown guy. Damon Severson's been a serviceable top four defenseman, but they didn't really hit on anybody the way they had earlier, the way they had with Parisi and with Zajac. The Devils went pretty much from the 2005 draft through probably the 14-15 draft. And they didn't really have, there was kind of one underwhelming draft after another. That catches up to you. 5 years after a draft, if you don't have guys that are poised to come in and contribute, that's a problem. And then when you have that year after year after year, you start running out of options. And that has to change. And many of these guys, especially deep in the draft, you can't put a grade on that until years down the road. But we're getting to that point now with the 2020 draft, the 21 draft, maybe to an extent 22, that when you don't have those guys, 2 or 3 from that era, from those years that have worked out deep in the draft to be contributors for you at some level, it really limits your options and your ability to build a good team. And now the other thing is, should the Devils draft someone at that pick with that pick or trade it? The farm system could use some help, but if you're in win now mode with Nico, Jack, and Brad and all these guys, you certainly have to entertain the thought of trading it. And a name that's popped up in the last few days I've seen has been a guy like Jordan Kyrou, who the Devils have been linked to back during the season too. And he's a guy maybe you could buy low on a Jordan Kyrou. I doubt St. Louis would move him for anything less than a first-round pick and a good young player. Would the 12th overall pick and Dawson Mercer get you Jordan Kyrou? Because that's the type of guy this team could also use in their top sixes. Now we're going to pivot a little bit from draft stuff to maybe building this team right now. But you take that 12th overall pick, and you can get a guy like Kyrou, who could be a 30-goal scorer for you, a guy who's signed at a very reasonable contract, who's in the prime of his career. So it's not like you're trading that for... I wouldn't want to trade that for a guy in his mid-30s. Or a guy who's 32. Right? You'd want that for someone who's, can you give me 4 or 5 good years here where this is both short-term and getting into that long-term? That's where I think it's worth it to trade those picks. It's hard to do that for a guy who's older. Ideally, you'd want to do that for a guy who's kind of in that prime, 25 to 30 years old, signed for a little bit. You're going to get some good years. And Kyrou could be a guy that fits. Last year, down year, 72 games played, 18 goals, 28 assists, 46 points. His career average is 80, an 82-game average. It'd be 28 goals, 35 assists, 64 points. So you'd be buying low on him. He didn't have a great year last year. St. Louis struggled, period. Seems like they're in a bit of a transition themselves. And maybe this is a good match. A guy like Dawson Mercer, who I would certainly have out there for a trade like this. He's a guy that could use a change of scenery, I'm sure. He's been a good player for the Devils, but offensively, he just hasn't produced in the manner that they need for someone in that role. If you're going to have Dawson Mercer in your top 6, you need him to be hitting 55 points, right? Can you give me 25 goals, 30 assists here? But he's kind of barely hitting 40. Jordan Kyrou is a guy that's had a 36, 37, and a 31-goal season. He's hit over 30 goals 3 times. He's a guy that can drive play. That's great. Great speed. Very good skater. He has great 5-on-5 numbers. So those are some areas there that they really need. If you look at the analytics 5-on-5, he's an above-average player, and he's on par with some of the best players in the game. This is a team that struggled 5-on-5 now for 2-3 years. You know, if you remember in the 25 season, they relied heavily on the power play, which is why Carolina ate them alive in the first round because, all right, we're just eliminate their power play with our great penalty kill, and the Devils won't score, period, which is kind of what happened. Kyrou really helps in that regard and maybe gives them a different type of weapon that they just don't have. He's a finisher with some speed. He's a bit of a different style than Meier is. You know, Kyrou on a line with Bratt and Hughes, you'd imagine on paper that should be a great offensive top line. You know, Kyrou is his also, I mean, he's played a decent amount of playoff games, 28 games in the playoffs, 11 goals, 2 assists, 13 points. So not a lot. He's clearly a winger. He doesn't take a lot of faceoffs. His Corsi numbers have been fantastic. 57.9 last year. Fenwick was 56.9. I mean, this is a guy that certainly fits exactly what they're looking for. Exactly what they're looking for. He's a good scorer. He's a finisher, plays with speed, plays with pace. Maybe he could use a change of scenery as well. Bit of a different look. Go from a team in St. Louis that seemingly is not in win-now mode and not like they're giving up for the long term and totally rebuilding like the Rangers should probably be doing. They're looking at maybe a transition, move some guys, free up some salary. You know, it seems like they're kind of entering that type of mode right now. Hand the keys over to some younger guys and maybe get rid of a guy like Kyrou to bring in a younger player and a prospect and a pick to try and revitalize this and start over again. But he certainly checks a lot of boxes for the Devils. That he would be a guy that would be in my top group of players I'd love to acquire. I know we've gone through Brady Tkachuk, talked to at an extent of even a crazy idea like Austin Matthews, just because I've been seeing the fans talk about it, and he talks about the change of scenery, etc., and whether or not Toronto is looking to make some crazy moves. I think Kyrou fits, especially if you view your core as Hischier, Bratt, and Jack Hughes up front, with Meier as more of a secondary guy. I think Kyrou kind of becomes your fourth best forward up front, pushes Meier down to your fifth best forward, which is maybe more of where he belongs at this point. You know, he's not that 30, 40 goal guy right now. He's a 25 goal guy, and if you're going to keep him around, he's not a guy that you can really move for anything. Then him as your fifth or sixth best forward in your top six puts you in a much better position, much stronger position. You're not putting all that weight on him to perform. You now have other players and other options to get those points, get those goals that, frankly, he just hasn't been getting for you. So I'd be definitely be in on the Jordan Kyrou stuff. You know, and again, this is all the rumor mill online. You know, nothing I know. I'm just a regular guy, just talking hockey. But just from the rumor mill online, that would be a name certainly keep an eye out for, and a guy that I would love to see. But in saying that, too, I think the Devils need some more depth and other options down in their lineup. And we talked about the drafting, how that's been difficult to round this lineup out with those guys. Where maybe you have some young guys that are very physical and just play with some pace, and we can have them be our fourth line, and they're going to be our energy guys right now. Maybe in the long term they can graduate to other levels and play on your second line, your third line, but they can come in. Scott LaChance maybe could be a guy like that. But guys, they're going to come in, they're going to crash and bang, they're going to give you some energy. Maybe they're just really just solid defensively, and they can give you something. Well, the fourth line last year was just a total hole in the lineup. They didn't really contribute much. They didn't score. They didn't provide energy. They weren't overly physical from what I remember. I know their hits numbers for a guy like Cotter was high, but I just didn't feel like they made a difference. You know, there wasn't that ability to wear opponents down, which is very important in the playoffs. There's that good clip of Paul Maurice screaming at the Panthers to just wear these guys down and forecheck hard so they got nothing left for Game 7. Who on the Devils is really capable of doing that right now? You have a few guys that maybe could, some guys with size, but they haven't had a useful fourth line in a while. You know, 2023 they did, but it's been a while. Like, I think great fourth lines in our franchise history, the CBGB line, Carter, Bernier, Gianta in 2012. Of course, the crash line. You look at the 2000, the 2003 teams and those fourth lines, and they just had good, serviceable players. It wasn't necessarily the crash line, but you had guys on those lines that were giving you good minutes that could do something for you. They could take some faceoffs for you. They can play some good defensive minutes. Maybe they can just go out and maybe it's not going to be putting on a clinic of hitting like the crash line did, where there was entertaining, or even the CBGB line with doing brawls and fights and stirring things up. But they could go out and just give you some quality minutes. And yeah, we're going to forecheck hard. We're going to get the puck in the zone, the other team's zone, the O zone, get some things going, change the momentum a little bit. The Devils don't have that. And maybe part of the issue when Jack goes out is they don't have a lot of other options. You're just going to neutralize Nico and Bratt now. You need a guy like Kyrou then in your top six, but I don't think you can just stop there. I thought the third line of Glass, Gritsuk, and Brown was very good, and Brown did everything you could expect. He moved up and down the lineup. He played well in virtually every spot they put him. But the fourth line was a hole, and it's got to be better. And it's a fourth line. You're not expecting him to go out and have 3 20-goal scorers. But could you get 2 10-goal guys and an 8-goal guy? They throw some hits. They play well on the penalty kill, can do some different things for you. It just seemed like Luke Glendening did that a little bit. But Siplikov didn't really give you much of anything. Bukestad was solid, again, down the middle. Okay, I mean, maybe he's a useful guy moving forward if he fits the plan. But I just don't, Paul Cotter's been disappointing. He has a great skill set, seemingly played well here in the World Championships. Started off well in 2024-25 season. Great on shootouts and breakaways. Like, he has a skill set to be kind of like, I feel like almost like a Miles Wood, like 15 goals and 5-10 assists, but throws a ton of hits and can give you some depth scoring once in a while. But, I mean, he didn't really provide much last year. He threw a lot of hits, but how many of them were meaningful? And, Stefan Nason was out for most of the year last year. If he comes back healthy, maybe he's a guy that can fit that role a little bit. Okay, maybe. But that's an ask. It would be great to give some young guys a chance. Maybe Scott LaChance is a guy that could fit that. Big player, physically strong, leader in BU when he was playing college hockey. But it seems like he might need a little bit more time in the AHL. We'll see how he comes in camp. But they got to address that too. It's to me, building a team, it's not just your top guys. You got to have that depth. You got to have those options. You got to come at teams in waves in the postseason. You have to have some matchup problems for other teams beyond just your top guys up front, which is huge, but also in your bottom six, where maybe you can have a very good defensive fourth line. Now, once in a while you can put them out against some of the better players on the other team and free up some offensive minutes for Nico. They don't really have a lot of those options right now, and that's what makes it a team, folks. Not one or two players. It's a team, and that's what Lamoriello did very well. You look at all the teams right now, the Final Four with the Avs and Vegas and Montreal and the Hurricanes, like they all have that. They have those options down in their lineup. Their third and fourth lines provide you something. Glass, Gritsuk, and Brown did give you some offense. I thought they were solid. Be nice to see maybe a little bit more. Maybe Gritsuk takes a step forward in his second year. But the fourth line has to be much better. And I don't think they're going to take great steps forward if they just get a top six forward. They need to get that plus probably 2 or 3 bottom six guys and upgrade from what they have there as well. And then the other upgrade issue here, this is another one I've seen because there's been the discussion with Rogalski being gone now, is goaltending. And I've talked about this virtually every week since the offseason because free agency, there aren't many options. And goaltending in the NHL is just in a very strange place. I urge everyone, compare all of the stats this year from the goalie stats 10 years ago, goalie stats 20 years ago. It's in a weird spot right now where there aren't many franchise caliber, number one, this is our guy. You have to build these tandems, which is difficult because most of these tandems are built with goalies that are much like Markstrom and Allen. They've kind of been maybe not journeymen, but they've had been bounced around a little bit. They've had good years, they've had bad years. You kind of don't know which version of this guy are you going to get next year. Look at Ottawa with Linus Ullmark. They thought they were bringing in a legit number one. It's been a rocky road. Look at Swayman with Boston. Bounced back this year. Last year wasn't very good. Sorokin last year wasn't very good at all. This year was fantastic. I know Bobrovsky is available, but he's coming off a bad year, and he's an older goalie now. Are the odds of him bouncing back better than Markstrom? Carolina's had goaltending issues like crazy, but now that it's coming together in the playoffs, but their goalie stats during the regular season was atrocious. Colorado's rolling with a tandem right now. This isn't the Patrick Waugh years where they have this number one guy that they can just hop on his back to the finals. This is Blackwood and Wedgwood, and they're kind of rolling with the hot hand right now, which that's what the Devils kind of did in 23. Vanacek cooled off, and then they had Akira Schmid come in. But now both of those guys are kind of the atypical journeyman goalie, which you're seeing a lot of, and it just seems like more of that than I ever remember. I don't have a number on that. I don't have a stat. I can't illustrate that. It just seems like that almost every team has some journeyman goalie tandem. And back in my day, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it just seemed like, there was about a dozen teams that had a clear-cut number one goalie, and then there was everybody else. And we took that for granted because we had the best of all of them in Marty. But, you go in that around 2000, you had Marty, you had Belfour, you had Waugh, you had Hasek, Chris Osgood. You had Kiprasov and Nabokov coming into the league. Pretty soon, Marty Turco was going to be in the league. It just seemed like there was a lot of options and just a lot of good goalies out there. That right now, like you got Vasilevsky is sort of the great of the great, I guess. And then Hellebuck, of course. Sherskin maybe is the best goalie in the league right now. Sorokin had a hell of a year. You got Ottinger, Swayman. Also another throwback from 2000. Ole the goalie, Olaf Kolzig. How can I forget about him? Right? But just seemed like there were more options and some just more serviceable guys back in the day to be legitimate number one guys. And now you're kind of looking at a tandem. Can you kind of break it down? You have one guy play 45 games, another guy play 37. That's why it seemed like Markstrom and Allen was a pretty good tandem last year, not this year. I just think in trying to sum up my rant here, I think an argument could be made that the odds of having good goaltending next year are the same with Markstrom and Allen or whatever mixture of whoever else is available because they all are like Markstrom and Allen, guys that are maybe a little bit older, guys that haven't found their way in the league, guys that still can't really establish themselves as a number one because they're just way too inconsistent. It just seems we already have that. Markstrom had some knee injuries last year. I think his health record, which we don't know, would be one of the most important. But frankly, I think if Markstrom appears to be ready for a healthy year, everything looks great. I don't like the contract. I would not have that. That's going to go down as one of Fitzgerald's strangest moves for sure. But I think you can argue you might as well roll it back. Markstrom played great in the Olympics. It's not like he was terrible the entire season. It just seemed the highs were high and the lows were very low. Jake Allen was pretty much Jake Allen. The options that are available are not very good. I just don't know if there's much of a choice. Devils just might have to roll this back and do what they can to get the best out of him. And now they have a new goalie coach. Maybe they feel a new goalie coach will be able to do some things for those guys that Rogalski was not able to do. But also keep in mind, Markstrom and Allen are veteran goalies. I think at this point, they kind of do things the way they want to do them, I would imagine. Like veteran pitchers. Like Brodeur later in his career, he was pretty much the goalie coach. I think they had, Chris Terreri around. But at that point, Markstrom and Allen have been around a while. I don't know how much a goalie coach is going to change it, or is it just the onus is on them themselves to bounce back next year. And again, Allen wasn't terrible this year. He was fine. It was exactly what they needed. It's Markstrom. If he can get that save percentage back up over 90%, he's going to be one of the best goalies in the league. I think only 3 teams had a save percentage over 90% this year, which is insane. So I know we live in a vacuum, and it seemed like our goaltending was just by far the worst. These guys are terrible. Yeah, but it was for probably 26, 27 teams this year had a goaltending issue. It wasn't just the Devils. It was almost everybody. That's a lot of goalies that did not perform well last year. That's going to be a lot of goalies that are going to be out on the market because all those teams want to make changes, and the very few teams with great goalies aren't going to be making a change unless you're going to blow them away. And the Jets, with Hellebuck, yeah, maybe they could move him. Maybe it makes sense, but to get Connor Hellebuck, I would imagine you're giving up quite a bit. And honestly, the other side of this, who's going to take on Markstrom in that contract right now? That might be more difficult to move than Hamilton or Palat's contract. But we will see. We will see. That's going to be a very interesting one to see how that all pans out with the goaltending situation. I think that's where Sonny Meda and the data and being creative and new way of thinking, that's going to be really where you see how that works. Because you're almost going to have to be if you want to make that situation better. As I said before, some player grades. So I've been doing this now in the off season where we do some grades on our favorite Devils, and not a great year overall, but some guys had good years regardless, some guys not so much, some guys in the middle. And this week, a guy that's been in news for some other just continuation of trade rumors with the Hughes brothers is Luke Hughes, as we all call him Lukey. It's rumored that the Minnesota Wild were trying to bring him over and make a trade for him this season. If the Minnesota Wild get the Hughes brothers from us and do to us, make it even worse than what they did with us with Parisi, and Guerin is able to do that, might go down as Fitzgerald swinging and missing on Quinn Hughes as being one of the greatest failures in this franchise's history, which then led to losing 2 of your better players. But trying to keep Luke's grade independent of that and independent of his brothers and independent of all of those things. Let's just look at Luke. And hopefully he's not trade bait where we lose Jack to Minnesota. But we've kind of been waiting for Luke to take a step forward in his development and become that top pairing powerhouse player for a little while now. He debuted in the 23 season, showed a lot of promise, that OT goal with Washington, and it's been up and down since then. The highs have been high. He's had some really bad games. He was booed last year at home. It's been a wild ride for Luke Hughes. But the talent is there, man. I mean, when you see this kid skate, it's unbelievable. And he's not a little guy. He's not Quinn and Jack, where he's kind of this small stature out there, super elusive. Luke Hughes is a fairly big player. He's not a little guy. Luke is not kind of 5'10", $170 like his brothers. I want to say Luke is 6'2", 200 pounds. He's a different type of player. I don't know if he'll be put up the points that his brother Quinn does, and that was never really my expectation. But I really do think if he works out, he could definitely be a top pairing, 60, 65-point number 1 defenseman that's just a workhorse, could play 27, 28 minutes, and just be that number 1 guy. And again, I think the talent is there. You see it all the time. He puts it on display. And these guys that play on the edge like that play with speed and creativity and let their talent take over at times, they're going to make some pretty big mistakes, especially earlier on in their career, as they're still learning just how to read the game at this level and this speed. And also just scouting reports and understanding other players and making those decisions. And I think with that one goal where he kind of put in his own net, not realizing who was right behind him, it's like those are things, it's a bad mistake, but do you learn from that and do you build on that? I compare him often to Niedermeyer, and I remember Niedermeyer took some time. I started watching the Devils in '95, lockout shortened season where we won the Stanley Cup. And Niedermeyer was a developing young player who was viewed as a potential number one defenseman, but still made a lot of defensive mistakes. Often was in the Jacques Lemaire doghouse. He debuted in the '93 season, but he didn't really come into his own into being the Olympic defenseman, the all-star, the guy who was shotgun to Scott Stevens and just gave you a completely different type of look as a number one defenseman until late in the '90s, like '97, '98. No, he had played about 4 or 5 seasons before we really started to see him become who we now all remember him as that number one clutch defenseman, great playoff performer, guy that, won gold and with Canada and was just this outstanding leader. And you have to build towards that. You're not just born that way. Stevens took time too, to a degree. He didn't win a Stanley Cup till way late in his career and have team success until later in his career. In defensive men, it's not all like Cale Makar or Matthew Schaefer or these guys that just they come out of the gate on like crazy. Victor Hedman took some time. So as I just said, Scott Niedermeyer took time. Chris Pronger took a while. They're not all the same. And I think Luke Hughes, I think he'll get there, but he still needs a little bit of time. But the clock is starting to tick. This isn't 2 years ago. He's now played in the 2024, 25, and 26 season. He has 3 full years under his belt. You'd hope that's enough experience to take a step forward next year. Could he be a 55, 60-point defenseman and just play better in his own end? I don't think that's that crazy. But you're certainly going to need that if you trade one of Hamilton or Nemec. Because the Devils do need more offense on the back end. That's something they lacked a lot. They lacked last year. I mean, really outside of Hamilton playing better after he got scratched. At times Luke was able to contribute. Nemec as well at times. But, they don't have offensive weapons on the back end, which is another area they might need to really improve upon this offseason. But regardless, you're paying Luke Hughes $9 million. That's to be a number one defenseman. If he doesn't turn into that, it's going to be a problem that holds this team back. And the argument was, if you bring in Quinn Hughes, does that hold Luke back? Because those are minutes that will be Luke's minutes at some point. You can't have 5 guys on the ice that all want the puck all the time. You like that attitude, but you have to understand where you fit. You have Luke and Quinn, 2 guys that thrive on having the puck a lot. Or is that really a good mix? But if Luke Hughes turns into a nice number 3 defensive-man, then you need a Quinn Hughes bad. But if he turns into that 60-point guy that maybe he's not the offensive dynamo that his brother is, but he's just better in a lot of other areas, and he's just a workhorse number 1 defensive-man, that's a big deal. And those are one of the types of players and the type of development of this team that could really start pushing us forward. So I think it's there, but I think he needs time. I'd give him a B- for last year. I thought he showed some promise at times. He had some really bad games. He also had some very good games. At the end of the season, Luke had 35 points in 68 games. His 82-game average is 47 points, 8 goals, 39 assists. His best season overall was his first full season, really, his rookie year, 47 points in 82 games. 25 season, 44 points, 71 games, and 35 points in 68 games. He's a defenseman. He's not going to, a rookie defenseman, you're not necessarily looking at 100 points. Those guys have done that, but like I said, most of these guys take some time. He's played 23:01 a night. It would just be like, would you want to see him put up some bigger numbers than that and stay healthy, which has been an issue for the Hughes brothers, period, especially Jack and Luke. Could we get another 82-game season out of him where he has 60 points? I don't think that's that big of a long shot, frankly. I think that's actually something you could expect, or we're close to expecting that. And the Devils really, really, really need him to work out into that player. Because now you have your core number one defenseman signed long-term if he does. Because if he doesn't, that's a tough player to go out and acquire. I will say overall, the Devils, they're in a good position in that you have some roles filled that are incredibly difficult to fill. Everyone talks about trading Nico Hischier for Quinn Hughes. Great. Quinn Hughes is definitely the second best defenseman in the league behind Cale Makar, and you can argue he might even be number one. But Nico Hischier is one of the best defensive centermen in the game. That also gives you 65-plus points a year. That is incredibly hard to find. The Devils have one of those guys. They have Nico. You have a guy capable of 100 points down the middle, Jack Hughes. Those two guys, those two types of players, very, very hard to find. 80-point wingers, there's a decent number, hard to get. They have those guys. What they don't have is a number one defenseman. And in light of trading Dougie Hamilton, which seems like Hamilton or Nemec, one of them is gone, I would imagine, just because of the financial implications. It's all about the implication. You're going to need Luke to really step up and play to that level that we're expecting. And to put up those points and to become that player. Especially Hamilton is gone. He's been that guy for them. You know, he had 73 points a few years ago when he's been playing and playing well. He's been viewed as their best offensive defenseman. You need Luke to be that guy if you want to have long-term success. But I'll give him a B-. I think some fans are really hard on him. I think you got to keep it in perspective. He's so young. He's 22 years old, for Christ's sake. Like, you gotta give him a break once in a while here. He made some mistakes. He had a few bad games. He got booed in his own arena. I don't think that really helps, by the way. But I do like his potential, and I do think there's a lot of potential there. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that come to fruition in the future. So, yeah. That's kind of where the Devils are at, I guess, right now, huh? Keefe is staying. Rogalski's gone. Brylin's getting a new assignment. Some front office changes. Some new assistant coaches coming. Some guys that underperformed that now we get to talk about how we hope they perform better. Some trade rumors with Jordan Kyrou. We covered a lot so far in the show, but as always, this is on Radio Garden State. You can listen to us on YouTube also. I put all the shows up there. You can also get the Radio Garden State Patreon. As, yes, I have to send the recordings over to Chris. I'm sorry, Chris. I haven't been able to get them over, but I will. I promise. So all the Patreon members of Radio Garden State get to listen to the Jersey Devils Brocast and whenever they want. Radio Garden State is now on Live 365, which is a really cool app. Download it. Favorite Radio Garden State. Radio Garden State is also on with Amazon Alexa. Radio Garden State is a Patreon. We have a lot of cool things going on here at the station as we continue to grow and get better and better each and every day. But to round out the show here, we have finally reached the Final Four in the 2026 Stanley Cup playoffs. I don't think I think in October, if somebody said Avs and Vegas in the conference finals, I would have been like, yeah, I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. Odds are that's probably going to happen. And here we are. You know, I kind of am rooting for Vegas for a few reasons. I'd say one, I like the story with Tortorella coming in late in the season, turning this thing around. He hasn't won a cup in a really, really long time. And there's a part of me that hates him. If you remember, the Devils had a bit of a rivalry with him when he was with the Lightning. And then, of course, with the Rangers. But he's always a guy I've always, it's like people love him or hate him. But I've always loved Tortorella. I've always a guy I would have probably loved him as a coach. And the Mitch Marner story, I think, is fascinating. And frankly, I think the Toronto fans deserve this for how they treated him. He's one of the best players in the league. He's a superstar. He's a stud. And you guys kind of booed him out of town and threatened his family out of town. And you deserve to watch Mitch Marner put on a clinic in the playoffs and go and win the Stanley Cup. Frankly. Maple Leaf fans and Mets fans have a lot in common. It drives me crazy. I'm saying that as a Mets fan. Just sometimes we don't need to boo everybody. It's not. I know we're all cursed here, but recognize when you have greatness. And Mitch Marner is one of the best players in the league with and without the puck, by the way. And you guys had no problem booing him out of town, and Matthew Nyes will be his replacement. And how did that work out for you? You guys all wanted Craig Berube, and Mitch Marner's not a Berube type of player. Let's get rid of him. Well, now he's in Vegas. If Vegas wins the Cup, he could very well win the Conn Smythe. But I'm going to go Avs in 6 in that series. I still hate them for 2001. And Raymond Bourque. Get at it. Hated that. It was the worst ever. But I think the Avs look like the team of destiny. I think they're going to win the Cup, period. I'm going to go Avs in 6 against Vegas. It just seems that they're just too deep. They're too good. You got McKinnon and McCarr playing like guys that are on a mission. Their goaltending has been great. I just don't know how you're going to... The Avs just have that look. I don't know how to explain it. You all know what I mean. They just got the look. In the East, I'm really rooting for the Habs. I really like Montreal making kind of a comeback as an organization and a franchise and looking like they could be a powerhouse. And I think that's great for hockey. I think it's great for the league. The Montreal Canadiens are kind of the OG franchise. They are the Yankees of the NHL. They've won, 24 Stanley Cups. And this team's exciting to watch with Cole Caulfield and Suzuki and Slavkovsky and what they've done in the playoffs. And that series against Buffalo was outstanding. It was so much. That Game 7 was so much fun to watch. And they're an exciting team to watch. And the Devils seem to have a lot of similarities to Montreal. They seem to be a team that has that type of play in them. The comparisons of maybe Suzuki and Nico and Cole Caulfield and Jack Hughes and Hudson and what he's done on the back end there and Dobish. It's just a fun team to watch. I'd love to see Montreal actually go and win a cup. I think that'd be great. Drive some of the other Canadian franchises crazy as they're the last team to win the cup in 93 and from Canada and see them do it again all these years later. I also don't like Carolina. Now, a very good friend of my family lives in Carolina. Her kids are wearing Carolina Hurricanes jerseys, and I said I'm on my way down with my Stevens jersey. But, that's for another time. But Carolina's been a pain in our ass. The Devils in Carolina just hasn't really worked out for us in a long time. I really don't want to see them in the finals. I don't think they're going to beat the Avalanche. I think the Avalanche are a team that Carolina would actually have a lot of problems and struggles with because Colorado, much like Florida, kind of like a powerhouse with a lot of weapons and a lot of different ways of beating you, that it's very hard to just contain them in the way that Carolina does. I think Carolina will win the series against Montreal. A young team that's speed and offense and skill and talent. They've surprised a lot of people, but I just think Carolina's built for that. I will say Carolina having this layoff is going to be tough. But I'm going to go Carolina in 6, Avs in 6, and then the Avalanche winning in 5 in the finals. It is currently 9:59, and I am about to sign off here for the Jersey Devils Brocast. Thanks for listening in. I will be back next week, Tuesday nights, 9 to 10. Check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and all that stuff. As always, you can listen to Radio Garden State, RadioGardenState.com, Live 365. I'll see you guys later. Let's go Devils. And enjoy your evening.